In a small, peaceful town nestled between rolling hills and thick, mysterious woods, there lived a young boy named Aryan. Aryan was 8 years old, with a mop of curly black hair that often fell over his curious, sparkling eyes. He was the kind of boy who could turn an ordinary day into an adventure. But Aryan was lonely. Oh, how lonely he was. His parents, both busy doctors, were often away, saving lives at the town hospital. His days were spent mostly with books, drawing, and exploring his little world of imagination. Despite his loneliness, Aryan had a remarkable gift. His imagination was as vivid as a painter's brush, colouring every moment of his day. He could make up entire worlds, filled with magical creatures, heroes and villains. But there was one creation that stood out. A friend he called Zeku. Zeku wasn't like any ordinary imaginary friend. He was tall, with shimmering blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. His large, almond-shaped eyes sparkled with kindness, and his voice, his voice, was soft and musical, like the sound of wind chimes on a breezy evening. "Zeku, do you think the stars can talk?" Aryan would often ask, lying on his bed and staring at the ceiling, which he had painted with glowing constellations. "They don't just talk, Aryan," Zeku would reply, his voice filled with wonder. "They sing. Can't you hear them? Listen carefully." Aryan would close his eyes, trying to catch the melody Zeku described. Sometimes he was almost sure he could hear it. Aryan's home was a cozy little house on the edge of the forest. The town itself was quiet, almost frozen in time, with cobblestone streets and old-fashioned lampposts that flickered at night. Behind Aryan's house stretched a dense, ancient forest, dark and full of secrets. People in the town told stories about the forest. Some said it was enchanted, others believed it was cursed. But Aryan didn't care about the rumours. To him, the forest was magical. It was his escape. "Zeku, what do you think is hiding in the forest?" Aryan asked one evening as they sat near the edge of the woods. "Many things," Zeku said thoughtfully, his almond eyes glinting. "Some good, some bad. But don't worry. I'll keep you safe. Promise?" Aryan asked, clutching Zeku's hand. A hand that felt cool and slightly different from a human hand. "I promise," Zeku said, with a firm nod. Life for a yen took an unexpected turn one rainy afternoon. He was playing in his room, building a tower out of blocks, while Zeku watched with a smile. Suddenly, a yen's blocks tumbled to the floor with a loud crash. "What was that?" Aryan gasped, startled. "It wasn't me," Zeku said quickly, looking just as surprised. Aryan frowned. "What's that?" Aryan whispered, his voice trembling with excitement and a bit of fear. He crawled under the bed and found something extraordinary. A small, round device that looked like it had come from a sci-fi movie. It pulsed with soft blue light, and strange symbols were etched across its surface. "Zeku, do you know what this is?" Ariel asked, holding up the glowing object. Zeku's eyes widened. For the first time, Aryan saw something he had never seen on his friend's face. "Fear. Put it down," Zeku said sharply, stepping back. "Where did you find it?" "Irit Levin. It was just under my bed," Aryan stammered. "Why? What's wrong?" Zeku hesitated, his glowing blue skin dimming slightly. "That's from my world," Hannah thought. He admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Your world? What do you mean, Zeku?" Aryan asked, his heart pounding. "You said you're from my imagination." "I thought I was," Zeku said, looking troubled, "but now I'm not so sure." Arian stared at Zeku, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. "Are you real?" he asked softly. The creature threw back its head. "Yodi-ai!" Zeku sighed. "I don't know how to explain this, Arian, but I don't think I belong here. And this," he pointed at the glowing device, "might be my way home. I need your machine," he said. Arian's mind raced. Home? What did Zeku mean by home? Could it be true that his imaginary friend wasn't imaginary at all? "But I don't want you to leave," Arian cried, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're my only friend, Zeku. You can't go." "No, Ma." Zeku knelt beside Arian and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I don't want to leave you either, Arian," he said gently. "But if I'm really from another world, I need to find out why I'm here. And how to get back." "But what if you never come back?" Arian asked, his voice trembling. "What if I lose you forever?" Zeku didn't have an answer. For the first time, Arian saw a sadness in his friend's eyes that mirrored his own. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Arian couldn't sleep. The glowing device sat on his desk, casting eerie blue light across the room. He couldn't stop thinking about Zeku. Was it possible his best friend wasn't just a figment of his imagination? And if Zeku was real, what did that mean for Arian's lonely little world? "Zeku," Arian whispered into the darkness. "Are you still awake?" "Yes," came the soft reply. "What happens if you go back to your world?" Arian asked. "Will you forget about me?" "Never," Zeku said firmly. "You've been my only friend too, Irene. I'll never forget you, no matter where I go." Arian swallowed hard, trying to hold back his tears. "Then promise me something," he said. "If you find a way back, you'll come back to visit me. Promise?" I promise," Zeku said, his glowing hand resting over Arian's. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, Arian and Zeku sat together, feeling the weight of an uncertain future. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The next few days passed in a blur for Arian. Zeku remained by his side, though his mood seemed heavier, more distant. Arian didn't know what to make of the strange device that had appeared under his bed, or of Zeku's words. He would sit by the glowing object for hours, running his fingers over the symbols, trying to understand what it all meant. But no matter how hard he looked, Arian couldn't make sense of it. His curiosity gnawed at him. Was Zeku really from another world? Could he possibly be telling the truth? On a Friday afternoon, Arian sat in his room, staring at the device, when he heard a soft knock on the door. He quickly shoved the glowing object beneath his bed and rushed to open it. To his surprise, it was his mother standing there, looking a little flustered. "Arian, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her voice strained. "Sure, Mum. What's wrong?" Arian replied, noticing her tense expression. 11 p.m. "I've been speaking with your father and—" She hesitated, looking over her shoulder as if she didn't want anyone to overhear. "Something strange has been happening around the town. People are saying they've seen something in the woods." "Seen what?" Arian asked, his curiosity piqued. His mother leaned closer, lowering her voice. "It's hard to explain. Some people claim to have seen strange lights in the forest, and others have heard sounds, noises that don't sound natural. I just wanted to make sure you stay away from the woods for a while." Arian's heart skipped a beat. Strange lights, noises. Was this related to Zeku? "Mum, I'll be careful," he said, though his mind was already racing. If something was happening in the woods, it could be connected to what Zeku had told him. Was Zeku trying to get back to his world? Could the lights and noises be a sign of Zeku's return? "I'm serious, Arian. Stay close to the house, okay? I don't want anything to happen to you." Arian nodded. But as his mother left to continue her work, he felt a strange pull toward the forest. The mystery of Zeku, the glowing device, and the unusual events were too much for him to ignore. That night, the storm that had raged earlier had calmed down, and the sky was clear, with just a hint of mist lingering in the air. Arian couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept drifting to the glowing device under his bed, to Zeku, and to the strange happenings in the town. It was past midnight when he heard a noise outside his window. A soft rustling, like the wind pushing against the branches of the trees. But this wasn't just wind. Peeking through the curtains, Arian gasped. There, in the moonlight, stood a figure at the edge of the forest. It was tall, too tall to be human, with a strange glow surrounding its body. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. Arian's first instinct was to call out to Zeku, but when he turned to speak, his friend wasn't there. "Zeku!" Arian whispered, his voice shaking. There was no response. Panic rose in Arian's chest. What was happening? Who was that figure? Was it connected to Zeku's world? Without thinking, Arian threw on his jacket and slipped out of the house, careful not to wake his parents. His feet were silent on the grass as he approached the edge of the forest. "What is that?" Arian whispered to himself, his breath coming in short gasps. He wanted to run, to get away, but something deep inside him drove him forward. He had to know what was going on. As he stepped closer to the figure, the glow grew brighter, illuminating the surroundings. Baron blinked in disbelief. The figure wasn't just glowing, it was radiating energy, like a pulsating light that seemed to shift and change, as though it were alive. His heart raced in his chest, but he couldn't stop now. He had to know what this was. "Zeku?" Arian called out softly, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" The figure's head turned slowly toward him, and Arian froze. The eyes of the creature, if that's what it was, were glowing with an intense, unnatural light. They were large, round, and filled with something Arian couldn't name. They didn't seem to be watching him, they seemed to be searching for him, as if they knew he was there, but they weren't sure what to make of him. The creature's voice was soft, almost melodic, but tinged with an odd urgency. "I've been waiting for you, child." Arian's blood ran cold. "What? Waiting for me?" he stammered. "Who are you?" The creature took a step toward him, and Arian instinctively took a step back. "I am from the same place as your friend. I've been sent to find him." "Zeku?" Arian gasped. "You know Zeku?" "Yes," the creature replied, its voice filled with a strange, haunting sadness. "He belongs with us. But he has been trapped in your world longer than he should have been. I will control him, and we will give him the love he seeks." "What do you mean?" Arian whispered, his throat dry. "Zeku isn't from this world." "He's real." Zeku sighed. The creature nodded, its glowing form shimmering as it did. "He is real, but not in the way you think. He is a traveler, stranded here by an event he could not control. He has been trying to return home, but his path has been blocked." Arian's head spun. "But he's my friend. I don't want to lose him." Can't you help him come back? The creature's expression softened, and for a moment, Arian could see the sorrow in its eyes. We can help him, but he must choose. He must decide whether to stay here with you or return to his world. I want him to stay, Arian cried out, his voice desperate. I don't want him to leave. The creature sighed deeply, its form flickering with a strange, fading light. It is not that simple, child. The decision is not yours to make. It is his. Harriet's heart shattered as the weight of the creature's words sank in. Zeku might leave him, his only friend, the one being who had been with him through everything. Please don't go, Arian whispered, his voice breaking, but the creature only shook its head. We can only show him the way. The choice is his. Just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished into the mist, leaving Arian standing in the yard. Alone. But was he truly alone? The days following that night were a blur of confusion and fear for Arian. He couldn't shake the image of the glowing creature, its haunting eyes locked on him as it spoke of Zeku's true origins. Every time he tried to focus on his homework or talk to his parents, his mind drifted back to the forest and the creature's words. Zeku is real, the creature had said. He belongs with us, not here. Arian couldn't bear the thought of losing his only friend, but the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Something bigger was at play. Zeku wasn't just his companion. He was part of something far more significant. He felt another impulse to fly, the queen waiting for him. Arian had to act. He waited until his parents had gone out to work, as they always did on weekdays, and quickly ran to his room. He retrieved the glowing device from beneath his bed and studied it once again. The symbols seemed to pulse now, like they were alive. Maybe Zeku's world isn't far away. Maybe I can help him get back, Arian thought, his pulse quickening. But where would he start? The creature had spoken of the path, a way back to Zeku's world. Arian needed answers, and he needed them fast. He decided to go back to the forest, hoping to find more clues about what had happened to Zeku and how he could help him. But he wasn't going alone. Zeku, Arian called, his voice shaking. Are you there? Zeku. There was a faint shimmer, and then, to his relief, Zeku appeared before him. His glowing blue figure seemed even dimmer than before, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with a worried expression. Arian, you shouldn't be here, Zeku warned, his voice low. The forest is dangerous. Something is changing. What do you mean? Arian asked, a knot forming in his stomach. I'm not the only one here, Zeku said, looking over his shoulder nervously. There are others. Beings like the creature you saw. Some are friendly, but others want me to stay where I am. They don't want me to go back, Zeku replied. He sounded disappointed. A fated lover. Why? Arian asked, his mind racing. Why would anyone want you to stay? Zeku sighed. It's complicated. My kind doesn't belong in your world. I came here by accident, and now I have to return. But there are some who don't want that to happen. They want me to stay, to remain trapped here, and they'll do whatever it takes to make sure that happens. Arian's heart pounded in his chest. The forest suddenly felt even more ominous, the trees casting long, dark shadows that seemed to move in the breeze. We need to leave now, Zeku said urgently, pulling Arian toward the edge of the woods. We can't stay here much longer. It's not safe. Before Arian could ask what Zeku meant, a sharp, eerie sound echoed through the trees, like a distant scream. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It sang Su, Senid Zeku. Run! Zeku shouted, pushing Arian ahead of him. As they dashed through the underbrush, Arian's mind raced. Who were these enemies Zeku had mentioned? What dangers lurked in the forest? Just as they reached the clearing near the edge of the woods, a sudden crack of branches and a flash of light stopped them in their tracks. Tarim gasped as a tall, shadowy figure stepped into the clearing. The figure was humanoid, with glowing red eyes and an aura of menace. It was taller than Zeku, its form flickering with dark energy. "You cannot escape," the figure said in a voice that was deep and resonant, like thunder rolling across the sky. "You are ours, Zeku, and you will stay." The noble scholar who had given her Chankere smiled. Zeku immediately took a protective stance in front of Arian, his body glowing with a faint blue light. "Stay back," Zeku warned. "You have no power over me." Zeku said nothing. "You think you can resist?" The figure laughed, a harsh, bone-chilling sound. "You're not in control anymore. We have already chosen your fate." Arian's heart pounded as the figure raised its hand. The air around them grew heavier, colder, and Arian could feel an unnatural pressure weighing down on him. His legs felt like they were made of stone. "No," Arian cried out, stepping forward. "Zeku, we can't let them win." Zeku turned to Arian, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Get back," he shouted. "I'll protect you, but you need to go now. I can't do this alone." Arian refused to back down. "No, Zeku, I'm not leaving you." He grabbed Zeku's hand and pulled him away from the advancing figure. "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone anymore." For a moment the figure paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing its face. But it quickly recovered, its red eyes glowing brighter. "Foolish child," it sneered. "You don't understand. Zeku cannot leave. He is ours." With a swift movement, the figure raised its hand and a bolt of energy shot toward Arian. In that instant, Zeku acted. He stepped in front of Arian, the energy hitting his body and sending him sprawling to the ground. "No!" Arian screamed, rushing to Zeku's side. "Zeku, please, get up. Run away, Kenze." Zeku groaned, his form flickering like a dying flame. I can't protect you forever, Arian," he whispered. "You need to go. This isn't your fight." But Arian wasn't going anywhere. He clenched his fists and stood tall, his eyes blazing with determination. "No! I'm not leaving without you." As the figure raised its hand again, ready to strike, a sudden gust of wind swept through the forest, sending the figure stumbling back. Arian's eyes widened in surprise as a new figure appeared beside them. Another glowing being, this one with a soft green hue. "Get away from them," the new figure commanded, its voice melodic but firm. The figure with the red eyes hissed in anger. "You think you can stop me, Elion?" The green figure nodded. "I know I can." With a wave of its hand, the green figure sent a shockwave of energy toward the red-eyed figure, forcing it to retreat into the shadows. "Thank you," Arian exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. The green figure nodded, its gentle aura calming. "I'm Elion. I've been sent to help. We can't let them take Zeku. He must return to his world." "Can you help him?" Arian asked, his voice trembling. Elion looked at Zeku, whose form was now flickering erratically, and then turned back to Arian. "We can. But we must act quickly. They'll be back, and they won't stop until they have him." The stakes had never been higher. Arian now understood that he wasn't just helping Zeku, he was helping to save him from forces far stronger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. But he wasn't alone. Elion, with his glowing green light, had become an ally, and together They would face whatever came next. The air felt thick with tension as Arian, Zeku, and Elion stood at the edge of the clearing, the moon casting long, eerie shadows over the forest. The sounds of the night were distant and muted, as if even nature held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The red-eyed figure had disappeared into the shadows, but it wasn't gone. Arian could feel it, lurking just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. "Zeku," Arian whispered, his hand trembling as it rested on his friend's flickering form. "What happens now? What are we supposed to do?" Zeku's blue light was barely visible now, his body shimmering weakly. His eyes, once full of hope, were now filled with sorrow. "I don't know, Arian. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The longer I stay here, the weaker I get. The longer I resist, the more they'll come for me." Elion stepped forward, his green glow casting a soft, protective light around them. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We must take action now, or they'll take Zeku back. By force, if necessary." "But how?" Arian asked, his voice shaking. "How do we stop them? We can't just—" Elion's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he seemed to be searching the woods, sensing something Arian couldn't. "There's only one way," Elion said quietly, almost as if to himself. "Zeku must make a choice that can break the bond between him and this world." Zeku's eyes widened in confusion. "A choice? But I don't understand. I can't just leave. I can't leave Arian. He's my friend. He's the only one who understands me." Elion turned toward Zeku, his voice gentle but firm. "Zeku, listen. Your bond to this world is not natural. It was never meant to be. Your kind was not meant to remain here. You've stayed far too long, and the longer you resist, the more powerful they become. If you stay, there will be no escaping them, no escaping the forces that want to control you." Zeku hesitated, his body flickering again, his light dimming. He looked at Arian, his gaze filled with a deep, unspoken pain. "I don't want to go, Arian. I don't want to leave you. But I don't know how much longer I can stay." Shalai watched him go, wondering how long he had left. The words hit Arian like a punch to the chest. "Please, Zeku, don't leave me. I need you. We can figure this out together. We can find a way for you to stay." Zeku shook his head slowly, his form beginning to fade. "It's not up to us, Arian. I've been holding on for so long, but I can't anymore. I don't belong here. And if I stay any longer, I'll lose everything. My world. And the people I care about." The wind picked up again, and a distant crack of thunder rumbled in the distance. The red-eyed figure appeared again, this time flanked by two more dark, towering shapes. They were closing in, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Elion stepped forward, his green light intensifying, his voice resolute. "Zeku, you must make your choice now. You must choose to leave, or they will make it for you." Zeku's body flickered once more, and he looked down at Ariane. His eyes were filled with a quiet sadness. I never wanted to hurt you, Ariane, but I can't stay." "I'm sorry." Zeku smiled, trying hard to pinch his morbid thoughts. A rainbow sharpened the rain. "No," Arian shouted, his heart breaking. "I won't let you go. You can't just leave. You're my friend, Zeku. You're the only one who's ever been there for me." Zeku's form flickered and dimmed. "I'm not leaving because I want to, Arian. I'm leaving because if I stay, I'll become something I'm not. And I can't do that to you. I can't let them control me. Lydia, Arian felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, his chest tightening with the weight of it all. But in that moment, something deep inside him shifted. He couldn't lose Zeku. Not like this. He couldn't let the forces that had been hunting his friend win. He clenched his fists, determination filling his every muscle. I won't let them have you, Zeku, he cried, stepping forward, his voice rising with fierce defiance. We'll fight together. We can beat them. I won't let you go. Zeku's form flickered, his glow dimming further. You don't understand, Arion. It's not that simple. It is, Arian insisted. It is, because we're friends, and friends don't leave each other. Before Zeku could respond, the red-eyed figure lunged forward, its hands crackling with dark energy. It was too fast for Arian to react, and before he knew it, the figure was upon him, its shadowy form reaching for him. No! Yaku shouted, his blue light flaring up suddenly, a burst of energy erupting from his body. With a flash of light, the red-eyed figure was sent flying backward, crashing into the trees. The ground shook with the force of the blast. Arian, listen to me, Zeku said urgently, his form flickering violently. You don't have much time. If I don't go, they will destroy everything. You have to let me go. Arian's heart ached, but he didn't let his resolve waver. He looked at Ion, his voice desperate. What do we do? How do we stop them? Elion stepped forward, his green light now fully enveloping them. There is only one way. Zeku must return to his world now. We must open the portal for him before they can stop us. Zeku nodded, his body flickering with a sense of finality. I'm ready, he said quietly. I have to go. In that moment, Arian made his decision. He stepped up to Zeku, his eyes fierce with emotion. I don't care what happens. We'll do this together. I'll help you. Said Zeku. Something rose inside him and his eyes glittered. Zeku's eyes shone brightly, and for a moment the darkness around them seemed to fade. Thank you, Arian, he whispered. Thank you for everything. Zeku bowed. The red-eyed figure lunged forward once again, its hands raised high. But this time, Zeku's light exploded outward, brighter than ever before. The energy radiated like a wave of pure force, pushing the enemies back and creating a shimmering rift in the air, a portal that glowed with the colours of another world. Arian, this is it, Zeku said, his voice trembling with emotion. I have to go. Arian stepped back, his heart breaking, as he watched his friend step toward the portal. Goodbye, Zeku, he whispered. I'll never forget you. He whispered the last word before emerging from the portal. With one last lingering glance, Zeku stepped into the portal, and in an instant it closed behind him, leaving Arian alone in the clearing. The battle had been won, but at a cost. Zeku was gone, and Ayahan had to face the emptiness left behind. But deep down, he knew that his friend had made the right choice. And though the pain was sharp, Ayahan also felt a quiet sense of peace. Zeku had returned home, and that was where he truly belonged. Arian stood alone in the moonlit clearing, the once bright glow of Zeku's light fading into the distance. The portal had closed, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. He could still feel the echoes of Zeku's energy, the warmth of his presence lingering in the air like a fading dream. Part of him felt empty, as if a piece of his heart had been torn away. But there was something else too. A sense of peace, of resolution. He had helped his friend, and though the cost was great, he knew it was the right thing to do. Zeku had returned home, and that was where he belonged. But as the wind whispered through the forest, Arian couldn't shake the feeling that his journey wasn't over. He turned around slowly, scanning the shadows that now seemed less threatening, as though the danger had passed for good. Elion stood beside him, the green light around him flickering gently, his face calm, but filled with the weight of what had just transpired. "You did well, Arian," Algin said, his voice soft, yet firm. "Zeku's journey home is complete. You've done something that many would have been too afraid to do." Arian wiped a tear from his cheek, trying to force a smile. "But I still miss him. I don't know how to feel. He was my only friend." Elion nodded solemnly. "Zeku was more than just your friend. He was a part of something much bigger than either of you. And now, he is where he's meant to be." "You're on." The words resonated with Arian, but they didn't ease the ache inside him. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had held Zeku's glowing form just moments ago. "What now?" he asked. "What happens to me?" "You are not alone, Arian," Eleanor said gently. "There is a greater purpose for you, one that you have yet to understand. You've proven your courage, your loyalty. You've done something most would never be able to do. Zeku's fate is sealed, but yours is still unfolding." As Elion spoke, Arian realized the truth of his words. The forest around them, once so dark and menacing, now felt alive with possibilities. The shadows no longer seemed to creep toward him, but rather to retreat into the corners of the world. The journey ahead would be different, yes, but it was his journey, and he would face it with the same courage that had led him to this moment. The sound of footsteps interrupted Arian's thoughts, and he turned to see his parents emerging from the woods. They had returned earlier than expected, and as they saw him standing there, alone, the concern in their eyes was palpable. "Arian!" his mother exclaimed, rushing forward. "What are you doing here? You scared us. We were looking for you everywhere." Arian's father came to stand beside her, looking just as worried. "What happened? Where's your friend?" Arian swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to say so many things, but the words caught in his chest. How could he explain Zeku? How could he tell them that his friend wasn't just a figment of his imagination, but something far more complicated, something tied to another world? His parents exchanged confused glances, but they said nothing. They had never truly understood the depth of Arian's bond with Zeku, and how could they? They hadn't seen the world through Arian's eyes, hadn't lived the magic of his friendship, but Arian didn't need them to understand. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. Elion stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Arian's parents. "The boy is tired," Arian said gently. "He needs rest. There's much more ahead for him, but tonight is not the time." Arian's parents seemed to hesitate, uncertain, but then they nodded, sensing the weight in the air, the quiet power that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. "Come, Arian," his mother said softly, taking his hand. "Let's go home." The word hung in the air like a promise. Arian wasn't sure what the future would hold, or what his role in it would be. But he knew one thing. He wasn't the same boy who had stepped into the forest that evening. He had faced darkness, made a choice, and helped a friend. He had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the strength to act in the face of it. The journey was far from over. As they walked back toward the house, Arian glanced over his shoulder one last time. The forest stood silent, its mysteries now fading into the background of his life. Zeku had gone. But the lessons learned, the strength gained, would stay with him forever. In the days that followed, Arian's life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. School resumed, and his parents went back to their routine. Yet, for Aryan, nothing felt the same. He no longer needed to hide in his room, hiding from the world that had once felt so distant. He felt as though he had unlocked a deeper understanding of life, one that had been hidden just beyond his reach. One afternoon, as Aryan was sitting by the window, he spotted something unusual. A faint flicker in the trees at the edge of the forest. His heart skipped a beat as he stood up and walked toward the door. But before he could step outside, he paused, taking a deep breath. He had learned so much in the past few days. He had learned that strength came from facing the unknown, that bravery wasn't just for warriors, but for anyone who stood up for what they believed in. Aryan walked outside, his heart steady, his mind clear. Whatever came next, he was ready. And if ever the shadows returned, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. As the seasons changed, the forest grew quieter, its secrets hidden beneath the roots and leaves. And though Aryan no longer had Zeku beside him, he felt a deep connection to the world around him, a bond with the trees, the wind, and the creatures that moved in the shadows. In his heart, he knew that Zeku's world and his own were intertwined, and that no matter how far apart they were, the friendship they shared would endure. Elian had been right. Zeku's journey was complete, but Aryan's had just begun, and he would face it, not with fear, but with the courage of a boy who had learnt that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go. But in doing so, one could discover a strength greater than anything they had known before. The future was wide open, and Aryan was ready for whatever came next. Days turned into weeks, and Aryan's life settled into a new rhythm. The strange emptiness that had settled into his chest after Zeku's departure was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He had come to understand that Zeku's absence was not a loss. It was a part of a greater story, a chapter that had ended, but whose lessons would echo through his life. It was a bright morning when Aryan stood outside his house, gazing at the same stretch of forest where everything had changed. The trees were swaying in the wind, the rustling leaves now sounding like a soothing melody. The shadows no longer held the same mystery. They were just the shadows of nature, harmless and familiar. As Aryan stepped closer to the woods, a sense of quiet strength filled him. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and loss, and he had survived. He had made the hardest decision of his young life, and in doing so, he had discovered something profound within himself. He was no longer the frightened boy who had once relied on an imaginary friend to escape the loneliness of his world. He was someone who had learned the true meaning of friendship, courage, and sacrifice. But something was still missing. He walked deeper into the forest, the crunch of leaves beneath his feet the only sound accompanying him. The cool air whispered against his skin, and for a moment he closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of the earth beneath him. It was then that he heard it, the faintest sound of something moving, something small, yet undeniable. His heart skipped a beat, and for a second he wondered if he was imagining it. But no, the sound grew clearer, closer, and his breath caught in his throat. Aryan, a voice called out, soft but unmistakable. He spun around, his pulse quickening, and there, standing in the shadows of the trees, was Zeku. But this was not the flickering, fading image of his friend that he had seen in the forest before. This Zeku was solid, whole, his light bright and steady, his form no longer shimmering with fragility but glowing with strength. "Zeku," Aryan whispered, his voice full of disbelief. How are you here?" Zeku smiled, a serene and peaceful smile. I never really left Arian, not in the way you think. I was always with you. I just needed to return to my world to complete my journey. Arian took a cautious step forward, his heart racing. But you were gone. You said you had to leave. What is this? What's happening? Zeku's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his glow now filling the clearing with a gentle light. I did leave. I had to. But my world is not as far from yours as you might think. It's connected, intertwined with the energy of this world, and in the moments when I needed to be there for you, I never truly vanished. You felt me, didn't you? In your heart. Arian nodded slowly, understanding now in a way he hadn't before. The connection, the bond they had shared, it was never just a figment of his imagination. Zeku had been real, and their friendship had been the force that bridged two worlds. I didn't understand at first, Arian said, his voice trembling with emotion. I thought you were just a dream, something I made up to feel less alone. But you were real. You are real. Zeku smiled again, this time a little wider. You were never alone, Arian. I was always here, and I always will be, just in a different way now. A soft breeze blew through the trees, and for a moment everything felt suspended in time. Arian's heart was full, not with sadness or loss, but with something greater, a sense of peace. I didn't know if I was ready to say goodbye to you, Arian admitted, his voice shaky. But now, I understand. I had to let you go, so you could find your way back home. And you had to grow too, Arian, Zeku said softly. You've learned what it means to be strong, to make hard choices, to face fear and keep going. You don't need me anymore in the same way. You've got everything inside you. Arian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Zeku's words settle in his chest. He felt lighter now, stronger. I think I'm ready for whatever comes next, he said, a new confidence in his voice. And I know that you'll always be a part of me. Zeku shrugged and said, And I know that you'll always be a part of Zeku's glow brightened for a moment, his smile full of pride. You've already come so far, Arion, and this is just the beginning. With that, Zeku turned toward the trees, his light fading into the distance. But this time, Arion wasn't afraid. He didn't watch in sorrow or regret. Instead, he stood tall, knowing that their bond would transcend the physical world. Zeku was returning home, yes, but he was always with Arian, in the quiet moments of the day, in the gentle breeze, in the rustling leaves. Arian turned back toward his home, his heart full, his mind at peace. He walked slowly, but with purpose, knowing that the world around him was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. End goal. Achieving what he wanted. As Arian crossed the threshold of his house, he felt a sense of completeness that he hadn't known before. He had faced his fears, made the ultimate sacrifice, and had let go of something he held dear. But in doing so, he had discovered that the true strength didn't come from holding on. It came from the courage to let go. His parents were inside, preparing dinner, their voices warm and familiar. Arian smiled as he entered the kitchen, feeling the comfort of their presence. He didn't need to explain himself. He didn't need to tell them what had happened in the forest. He had already learned that, sometimes, the most important things were the ones that couldn't be put into words. His parents looked at him as he sat down at the table, their faces filled with affection, concern, and love. They knew something had changed in him, but they didn't need to know the details. Arian had grown, and that was enough. He had learned that friendship wasn't just about proximity, about being physically near someone. It was about the bond that tied two hearts together, no matter the distance. It was about the moments of quiet understanding, the strength to stand together even when apart. As the evening stretched on, Arian sat at the table, surrounded by the warmth of his family. His mind was at peace, his heart full. The future was still unknown, but he knew he could face it, with or without Zeku by his side. The lessons he had learned would stay with him always, guiding him through whatever came next. He had found strength in letting go, and in that, he had discovered that sometimes the hardest journey was the one that led to self-discovery.